Talk to me about the golden age of bodybuilding. Why do those guys live longer than the new guys? All right, to Rod and all of you other guys that keep asking me this, get ready because here we go. We're going to talk about it. You will know the truth,
and the truth shall set you free.
Let's go. Today's your Friday quick hitter. Why do the guys from today live much shorter lives than the average golden era bodybuilder? Well, you want to know the truth.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Well, the truth is, golden era bodybuilding was really in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it was defined by guys that were very, very fit, not just incredibly muscular. Now, let's look back at some of those guys, and they had great physiques. Those guys tended to focus on how they look proportionally and how the muscles all flowed together. Now we just look for incredible amounts of mass. And the golden era really, guys, came to an end in the early 90s. And I would say I would dare say it came to an end at the advent of the first Mr. Olympia, because now the guys were all vying for that one spot. Before, there were guys that were vying for multiple titles, and yes, it was difficult and competitive, and there was not as many pros, but there was not just that one ultimate title back then. And once the advent of the Olympia came around, I think it really pushed guys to start using more and more drugs, which were not as readily available back then, but opened up a black market. And so all of these things combined really created this coagulated soup of what we have now. Now, again, I'm going to give you 4 reasons why I believe the golden era bodybuilders live longer than they do today. Number 1, they had a health-focused approach. Guys, golden era bodybuilders prioritized the overall health and well-being as a foundation for their training. They weren't just looking for ultimate mass. They were looking for fitness. They were looking for overall health. The idea back then, coming out of the wars or the different conflicts we had, where guys were looking to live longer. People were looking to live longer. People were looking to increase their overall health. And so everything wasn't just as focused on the outward appearance as much as it was being fit. And so they emphasized overall health in their training. And then they emphasized more balanced nutrition and cardiovascular exercise back then as well. And they maintained healthy lifestyles. Now you look at a 320-pound bodybuilder like I was, guys, I wasn't running 100 feet. Those guys back then could run a marathon and then go to the gym and work out. That was an amazing way to live back then, but it was also a lifestyle that was much different than today's modern bodybuilder, who basically sits like a slug until it's time for him to gear up for a show. And for the most part, that's when they start working out. So there was a very holistic approach, and it helped reduce the risk of chronic heart disease and the different diseases that we see bodybuilders dying of today. And so the ultimate was they had healthier habits in their lives, and those habits promoted longevity. And so, guys, today we don't see a health-focused approach in bodybuilding. As a matter of fact, it's the antithesis. It's an approach that sacrifices health, not engages the body and wants to promote health. And so the second thing is there were sustainable training methods. One of the big things I did as a coach, and honestly as a bodybuilder, bodybuilder was tried to make sure that I was training for the long term. And I wanted my guys as a coach to be able to train for the long term. In other words, train in their 60s and 70s and 80s if they live that long. And so I did not want guys to just destroy themselves in their early years. As Lee Haney used to say, let's stimulate, let's not annihilate. Good example, when I would see guys at the gym who would be working arms, and you'd see them just walk into the gym and they would walk over and they would just start picking up weights and doing things that were heavy. And I was like, that is a guy that truly has no idea what he's doing. He's not warming up his joints properly. He's not stretching properly. In other words, he is not going to live very long in the gym given the fact that he has bad habits. I want those elbows warmed up. I want those knees warmed up. I want those shoulders warmed up. I want everything warmed up before we ever get to anything that's heavy. But golden era bodybuilders, while their training may be considered outdated now, their methods emphasize longevity and injury prevention. Now, man, you will see guys doing incredibly stupid things in the gym. And I often wonder, where in the world did you get that information? Well, look no further than the great knowledge thing of the sky, the internet, right? It's just this ethereal thing that floats out there that everybody goes to, and they just take everything they read as gospel. And so they had more sustainable training methods. They focused on proper form, controlled movements, and they made sure they would get adequate rest and recovery, because most of those guys, I would say 95 to 98% of them, weren't on steroids back then, or they were on very little steroids. They were much harder to get. It wasn't until the advent of Joe Weider, who came in and really started making this into an industry, did we see the steroids really come into play. And guys, look, you and I have all heard the stories about how Joe Weider had boxes of steroids on his shelves earmarked with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Franco Columbu, Bertil Fox, and all of Danny Padilla, all of these different guys. And so these guys, before that time, they didn't have the access to that. And then again, they had sustainable training methods in the fact that they avoided excess weights and really high-risk techniques. They minimized the risk of acute injuries and long-term joint damage. And so these guys were training long into their 70s, most of them. Look at Arnold. Guys, Arnold took a lot more than what Arnold admits to, but most guys aren't living to Arnold's age now either. Number 3, there was a lower usage of PEDs back then. Guys, there was a lower usage because there was not the technological advances that we have today. It was harder to get back then than it is today. Every 14-year-old can get on the internet and buy a drug. It's incredible what we are seeing with 12, 13, and 14-year-old kids already using trenbolone acetate or trenbolone enanthate. I just did a video recently on the dangers of tren. Join the dark side. If you haven't seen it, you got to go see it. But I had kids that were as young as 14-year-olds commenting on that video. Kids contacted me talking about how they were interested in using tren. And then, of course, I had the normal useful idiots that were commenting or sending me emails telling me what an idiot I was and how I don't know anything about tren. And I'm like, dude, I have forgotten more about drugs than you know. I mean, this is just ridiculous. So there was a much lower usage of performance-enhancing drugs back then, and just because a lot of it was the availability. And remember, with time, we are seeing the advent of knowledge increase more and more and more. We are now seeing that knowledge increases, not like in the 1800s or 1700s and 1800s, knowledge doubles every 100 years. Now we are seeing knowledge doubles, they are saying, every 48 hours with the advent of AI. And so every 48 hours, knowledge is increasing by double, so it's increasing exponentially. And so what we are seeing is more and more drugs come out, more and more processes to build the body in faster and faster ways. Now, this may seem like it's a great thing when it comes to bodybuilding, but it's killing guys. And with the advent of this that happened in the last 3 years, we are really seeing guys fall off the face of the earth. And there are estimates that the overall amount of people that have died from that so far, I have seen and read, maybe over 1 billion people. Now, that is substantial when we are seeing world-class athletes die from this or become disabled. So these guys didn't have the availability of the anabolic steroids like we have now. They didn't have growth hormone available. They didn't have the knowledge that insulin was as powerful as it is. And that wasn't until the advent, I believe, of Tim Belknap, who was a diabetic bodybuilder, who everybody started going, wait a minute, this guy's got an incredible amount of mass on him for light heavy. What is he doing? And so that is when we really started seeing guys come in and start using insulin as well. So those golden era bodybuilders have much lower exposure to those kind of substances. They didn't understand the potential risk of them either because they weren't able to get them. Now we know the dangers, and we not only use them, but we use them in a much greater way than they ever have in the past. Number four is a balanced body composition. Wait a minute, what are you talking about? Well, golden era bodybuilders, they aim for balanced and aesthetic physiques. They were focused on muscle development and overall symmetry, not just a crazy amount of mass. I am 5'8". I was carrying well over 300 pounds, and I gotta tell you something, doing cardio was tying my shoelaces. I mean, it's a bad thing when you can't even wipe your own bottom side because you're so big and so massive that you can barely move. So basically, you are nothing more than a show pony. You are good for nothing. You're that car that they pull out of the trailer, they pull it over into the parking lot, and everybody oohs and ahs over it. But the truth is, that car isn't going to go out and run a 500-mile race. You're going to put that car right back into the trailer, and that's all it's good for. So bodybuilders now, they don't have good body compositions. They are not focused on overall health. All they are focused on is how they look. And I really look back at where this really, to me, started. I really think it started back there around the Mike Matarazzo thing. And I liked Mike a lot. And I'm telling you, it's one of those things, one of those guys who, to me, when I remember seeing him, it just seemed like he carried a crazy amount of mass. And you would see guys like Matt Mendenhall and those guys coming out, and Jeff King and those guys, and everything just started changing. And then Dorian Yates came in, and the game changed altogether. When Dorian came in and that kind of mass came in, I think it was off to the races. So the guys nowadays, especially in modern days, you look at these guys and they're so massive. There's no real, there's no real balanced aesthetic to them anymore. And guys, I have to say that about myself. I believe in my younger days, even then, I was still focused on mass. And I carried an incredible amount of mass in my younger days that, honestly, I'm not even sure how I did it. I didn't have growth hormone and all of that stuff back then. But I still carried an incredible amount of mass back then. That's how, at the age of 41, when I got back into bodybuilding, I shot up immediately over 300 pounds and started carrying a ton of mass because of the advent of all of the new drugs. So it's a really, really unhealthy sport now. People are still mourning the loss of Joe Aesthetic. People are still mourning the loss of John Meadows and Cedric McMillan and now Gustavo and all of these guys that are dying off so quickly. And guys are going, why are they dying? Okay, so there's my 4, but I've got a wild card that I want to give you. And my wild card is this: the stimulants. I do not believe that they had the stimulants like we do now. You didn't have all the pre-workouts and the constant caffeine and all the constant drugs that people are using to stimulate their body and to get their hearts revving like an engine. You don't see that now. You didn't see DNP, you didn't see clenbuterol, you didn't see all of the different diuretics back then that they have now. Those things weren't really in place. And so those things, I think, with the amount of PED use and the amount of foods that I haven't even mentioned yet, but the amount of food, all of these things are this perfect storm to kill guys. Then, as I said, add that in, and dude, I'm telling you, the Grim Reaper is at the door. Including all of the social pressures we have now, guys, it's just one big death soup. That's what I think. Tell me what you think. Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I even close? But I'm telling you, I think I'm right. That is the hard truth. Thanks for coming in.